Longlegs is a 2024 horror film that follows Agent Lee Harker as she tries to apprehend serial killer Longlegs, who imbues chaos into the lives of innocent families by sending them possessed dolls resembling their young daughters. These dolls send demonic subliminals to the fathers to kill his family and then himself. The marketing machine went into full force, creating a narrative that this was the greatest horror film of the year, saying it was the next The Silence of the Lambs. Lee is a female detective who, like Clarice, seems to have a connection with the killer. However, this is where the resemblance wanes. It belies comparison despite the similar time period, a serial killer who wears makeup, and the paternal connection the female protagonist has to another serial killer, Hannibal Lecter. Longlegs takes place in 90s Pennsylvania and drifts back into Lee's childhood in the 70s as we learn about her connection to the titular Longlegs. Longlegs is strikingly similar to 2013's Prisoners, a thriller about devil-worshipping serial killers who abduct children in an attempt to plunge suburbia into the devil's dark dominion. Both films hope to explore the many manifestations of trauma and the fragility of the family that is supposedly constantly under attack, but one seems to have done it more than 10 years prior. Prisoners follows Detective Loki, who is assigned to a case of a dual child abduction of Anna Dover and Joy Birch. The investigation rips apart the families of the two young girls, especially Keller Dover, who plunges into alcoholism and kidnaps Alex, who he suspects is the killer. Both fathers then torture him, thus becoming perpetrators of violence themselves. The setting of both films have an inescapable dread, the eerie atmosphere awash with muted grays and browns, supplied by the withering trees, hinting that death is lurking. Lee has an instinct that is almost supernaturally accurate. She can detect which home the perpetrator she has been assigned to look for resides. When she tells her partner this, he naturally doubts her.
He's in there.
What makes you say that?
I don't know.
But when he takes the lead to check the home, he gets shot, proving that Lee is spookily accurate. Her gift seems to come directly from otherworldly forces, as we find out later, specifically from the devil. Loki is also said to have never lost a case, hinting that he too has a strong intuition.
Your police captain told me that you've solved every case that you've ever been assigned, is that right?
Loki's interest in astrology is as far as the movie strays into non-reality.
Thanks. Do you have any of those fortune cookie things?
My boss told me cops don't like fortune cookies.
Loki is good at his job. He does have a natural instinct, like Lee, but the story does not dive into his personal life or anything supernatural. The only inkling we get into his past is when he meets the priest and talks about growing up in a Catholic orphanage.
Spent 6 years in the Huntington Boys Home, Father. Hey, you know the Huntington Boys Home, right? Huh?
His name references Norse mythology's Loki, who is morally ambiguous and has a penchant for chaos, similar to the demonic Longlegs. The dichotomy of morality is featured in both films using the Christian framework of good and evil, with the devil adopted by the antagonistic forces. In Longlegs, he is a servant of the devil. He kills families by placing his demon magic into life-size dolls of children who are born on dates with some sort of demonic significance. These murders are all meant to complete a ritual that will serve the devil's purpose of inflicting chaos into the world. While in Longlegs, we do not have the reason as to why Longlegs would want to do such a thing in a personal sense. In Prisoners, Holly, who is revealed to be the person behind the kidnappings, explains that she used to be a devout Christian.
My husband and I were very devout at one time. After our son died of cancer, we started seeing things differently.
After losing her son, her and her husband decide to serve the devil instead and abduct children and make monsters out of men to wage a war on God.
Making children disappear is the war we wage with God. Makes people lose their faith. Turns them into demons like you.
In Longlegs, Ruth is like Keller and Holly. She too is a devout Christian who becomes a devil worshipper to protect her daughter.
Prayers don't do a goddamn thing.
Since there's no father in Lee's life, it opens up a vacuum for Longlegs to insert himself and find a person to do his bidding. Both films need a male authority or someone resembling it to save the day, because God is the ultimate father figure. While in Longlegs we have Ruth pretending to be a nun who works for the devil, and in Prisoners we have an alcoholic priest who is a level 2 sex offender who took it upon himself to murder Holly's husband and hide his body in the basement for years. Similar to Ruth, who hid Longlegs in her basement because to reveal him would result in her having to face consequences. For the priest, legally, and for Ruth, demonic.
If they don't die, then we will burn and twist and burn and twist in hell forever and ever.
This priest, who's also someone who harms children, kills Holly's husband for the greater good. The image of the corrupted moral authority is a parallel in both films as a way to show the corruptibility of even the most God-fearing. The priest, who is supposed to live a moral life, has been corrupted by so-called evil that has caused him to transgress. Yet he has moral superiority that a killer was able to approach him, and he took the opportunity to kill him because he believed he had the moral high ground and it was his duty to God to do so. The death of Longlegs and Holly's victims, Bobby Taylor, also mirror each other. Their arrests are seemingly breakthroughs in their cases. When Longlegs gives clues to Ruth's involvement in the murders, he killed himself in a gruesome fashion, leaving viewers perplexed. All signs point to Taylor being the killer. His off-kilter disposition, stalking the homes of the victims, the bloody clothes that belonged to the children, as well as substantial knowledge about mazes. However, it is revealed that he was just a victim who was paralyzed by his traumatic childhood kidnapping, and he has spent his life trying to recreate these crimes. The Invisible Man was potentially Taylor's kidnapper. It has a similar quality in that it is able to confirm our biases that a lone wolf, a male, is the one capable of gruesome murder, instead of having accomplices who might even be women. So we do not see Holly and Ruth as capable at first until the prime male suspects die. Longlegs' death is drawn out and violent, while Taylor's is shocking and quick, with minimal emphasis on gore. Longlegs' destruction is the opposite, with his surgically botched powder-white face being deformed and bloodied can reveal a horror fascination that fetishizes the killing of the monster, turning it into a spectacle to revel in. This fascination usually ends with the spectacle of the monster's destruction. Neil regards such exhibitionistic overtones as having fetishistic associations. The films have similar imagery like mannequins, dolls, and snakes. Snakes are an obvious reference to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the corruptibility of man. In Christianity, while dolls are allowed for non-religious purposes, here Longlegs uses the dolls for demonic purposes, practicing idolatry. Ruth is murdered by Lee in the end. Before Lee shoots her, Ruth brings out a knife in an attempt to stab her. Lee says,
Don't call me!
She has adopted the service of the devil.
Hail Satan.
Prisoners opens with Keller saying a prayer. However, when this situation arrives, he does not. He doubles down on revenge, becoming the one who hurts instead of forgiving. The opposite of love thy neighbor. Keller, as a doomsday prepper, he's prepared for any danger.
My husband likes to be prepared for emergencies.
This could come from the Christian doctrine itself as the importance of being virtuous so that they can be raptured when the world ends. The feeling that family is always under attack. He has an idea that selfishness is inherent to the human spirit, and that they always have to be prepared for when chaos ensues. Horror films have always used Christianity as a comparison for the capitalist society we live in. Christianity shapes ideas, understanding, and practices. Reading films in terms of Christian imagery, a film may not consciously or reflexively refer to Christianity, yet it may still evoke Christianity simply because it is so pervasive. Here, when it's done so explicitly, it tells us that the idea of good and evil is nothing beyond rules made to organize society. True good and evil is unknowable. Holly's motivation is very much tied to the theme of trauma, but in Longlegs, the main villain is not given this explanation. The goal is to keep Longlegs as an unknowable creature who is pure evil, so as to create a living demon. In life, though, we know that evil is not created in a vacuum. The depiction of mental illness in films most commonly appears in 3 popular genres: the drama, the horror film, and the suspense film. Here in Longlegs, it offers visibility to people who may be suffering from obvious signs of illness. However, they are often the villains and perpetrators of violence. Ruth, for example, is a hoarder.
For both of our sakes. But I never threw anything away.
She keeps everything of Lee's after the age of 9, the year Longlegs enters their lives. Her hoarding is a trauma response, a reminder as to why she does her evil deeds for Lee. The only outright mention of mental illness is seen in Carrie Ann Camera, a surviving victim of Longlegs, who is in a mental institution. After Longlegs visits her, she's suddenly resurrected from catatonia, as she's still possessed by devil magic. Equating mental illness with demonic possession is a dangerous old perception, but here it is, and Camera kills herself. Individuals with mental illness are often portrayed as aggressive, dangerous, and unpredictable. This may add horror and suspense elements to make the plot exciting, but at a cost. People with mental illness are more likely to be victims than the general public, yet movies continue to perpetuate the idea that they are the ones that cause harm first. Associating villainy encourages viewers to actively root for the death or destruction of these disabled characters. The people in these films, or any horror film, can be read as suffering from severe trauma and mental illness. In reality, people with these delusions of devil worship might be having some sort of psychosis. Like Alex and Bobby's meek, childish dispositions is a coping mechanism. Their arrested development is caused by severe trauma. Society sees them as generally weird, so they can be attacked brutally by Loki in a show of police brutality. They are assumed guilty first, then later revealed to be victims. Films are especially important in influencing the public perception of mental illness because many people are relatively uninformed about the problems of people with mental disorders, and the media tends to be especially effective in shaping opinions in those situations, in which strong opinions are not always held. Overall, the mass media do a poor job of depicting mental illness, with misinformation frequently communicated, unfavorable stereotypes of people with mental illness predominating, and psychiatric terms used in inaccurate and offensive ways. This is largely due to media framing, a concept that refers to the way a form of media presents and organizes information that leads to interpretations by the public. In the case of mental illness and film, media framing is overwhelmingly negative and usually inaccurate. The media frames for mental illness are typically narrow and distorted, frequently presenting those with mental illness as violent, dangerous, simplistic, disillusioned, and/or innocent. This is troubling for at least 2 reasons. Number 1, mental health literacy levels for the general public are low. Number 2, research has shown that people's primary source of information about mental illness are the mass media. In films, we see people exhibit mental illness like psychosis in the form of seeing visions, hearing voices, and engaging in antisocial behavior like serial killing, which may manifest from psychopathy and abuse-related trauma. When there is a strong resemblance to these people on screen, it is possible for the viewer to believe their stereotypes, and politically and socially, this might affect these marginalized mentally ill people by offering them less support in real life. Loki and Lee are in law enforcement. The law progresses at a dawdling pace by design to maintain the status quo. It is part of the many intricate systems that support the capitalist interests of the state. They have to come in to save the day. They are manifestations of patriarchal strength, neutralizing evil. They attack mentally ill people in both films. As a society, we don't really know what else to do with them. In Longlegs, the supernatural is a way to excuse the root of his evil coming from the devil instead of anything systemic. While in Prisoners, they attempt to explain it with trauma and the unevenness of revenge. Who is truly punished in the pursuit of justice? Does the cycle of crime keep turning without acknowledging the underlying causes of it? When the villain resembles old, queer, unhoused, mentally ill people suffering from the unevenness of society, showing them in a negative light always is what makes it horror. In a film, these shorthands are effective because you're programmed to fear these supposed monsters, while the problem in horror can result in over-representation of these people, making villains out of them. Film, after all, is a product. Horror cannot solve all our problems, but at least it illuminates them for us to see. The mental illness doesn't excuse the abuse the children face, but these films act as detriments to those coping. There's no denying that those people who have died are victims, but this is a work of fiction. In real-life crimes, the idea of good and evil is very complex. Gender, class, racism, etc. Many reasons shape people's lives. People being mentally ill is a sign of illness within society. Films become more compelling when they reflect these complexities. The family plays a significant role in any society, determining everyone's psychic and social formation according to changing historical, political, and ideological dimensions. Families may be complex entities, good or bad, depending on particular circumstances. As an institutionalized prop of bourgeoisie capitalism, producing colonized subjects and reproducing ideological values, the family is extremely dangerous. A case may be made for abolishing it entirely, but this argument is too rigidly dogmatic. It avoids more challenging dialectic and dialogic approaches to understanding families as contradictory entities containing good and bad features. Despite existing within capitalism, the family plays a significant role in any society, determining everyone's psychic and social formation. According to challenging historical, political, and ideological dimensions, families may be complex entities, good or bad, depending on particular circumstances. Since the 1970s, the threat in horror films has emerged within the home. On screen, the family became a source of perpetual violence. The 1970s were a time of political disillusionment and the re-examination of family structures with the bolstering of the feminist and queer liberation movements. By introducing the family as a central figure in horror films, it tells us more about the societal horror of living within a family. Williams goes on to state how cinema is also part of the machine that helps propagate ideas about family structures through its stories of families under threat. Cinema is also a social institution closely aligned with psychic mechanisms that attempt to regulate subjectivity in particular ways similar to traditional families. A lot of violence can stem from a family, as they are the first point of abuse one might experience throughout their lives. Longlegs, whose mission is to fracture families, as it is a valuable entity in our society. Our culture naturally shames those who are not living the standard heteronormative, monogamous, cisgendered, nuclear family lifestyle. Ruth, as a single mother, invites evil into her home, especially in a 1970s setting that can read as an attack on those women who are unable to take care of their children alone. In Longlegs, after Ruth made a call about a strange man lurking around her property talking to her daughter, no further help was given to them. Even though Ruth has a shotgun, Longlegs overpowers her somehow. Ruth, being so compliant, believing everything Longlegs says, is similar to how Holly is also presented. She is made to seem worse. Women cannot be left to their own devices. It takes just one single parent household to cause so much destruction. Lee is visibly awkward, withdrawn, and otherworldly because she's basically possessed. Her coldness towards the audience gives her an air of intelligence like a savant, a characterization usually reserved for male protagonists. She's meticulous, yet she remains naive about the workings of her own life because of the misdirection by her mother and the demonic forces at play. Lee seems tormented by her abilities, an effect of a lingering trauma, a symbol for the passing down of it through father to child. Carrie Ann also describes how she's not liked by her mother, who describes her mother hating her for coming out all wrong.
Mom always hated me because I'd come out wrongly when I was born.
These are all read as emotional neglect from parental figures. Longlegs and Prisoners are both family stories first. They comment on the fracturing of families. They also comment on how the family can be a site of trauma, while Prisoners features the family as a site of reprieve from danger that has to be protected at all costs, at the expense of those who are deemed as monsters. The monster is a feature of most horror films, where it sometimes has connections with the normality to which it is supposedly opposed. To Williams, the horror monster is a way to show how evil can exist in the good. In Prisoners, Keller is the one who is corrupted, while Longlegs, Ruth, is also corrupted by evil by the end. These films tell us that maybe we are all one traumatic experience away from transgressing into the territory of a monster. Queer coding refers to the Hollywood trope of giving villains stereotypically queer attributes. For men, they might present more feminine, and for women, the opposite, to appear more masculine. These characters have a long history in Hollywood, but in recent years have become symbols of queer resistance and of the only early visible queer characters in cinema. Longlegs is also queer-coded with his long hair, a high wispy voice, makeup, and of course, he makes dolls. His look deviates from prescribed masculinity. His androgynous look can be associated with the demonic, as the devil is also seen as a gender bender. Notions of the figure of Satan as women, Jeffrey Burton Russell notes that tradition has spoken of the devil as it has of the Lord in masculine terms. Gender bending would then be another sign of the liminal and blasphemously category-defying nature of Lucifer and his demons. From a historical perspective, Satan as female is a center stage concept in Christian culture. When a man has these qualities, our natural instinct, what we have been conditioned, would cause people to subconsciously attribute people with these traits as demonic. Longlegs, despite his evil magic, only looks for women to do his bidding, but single mothers who are in already vulnerable positions. There is danger in being a woman alone in the world. A woman like Lee, who's the only type of woman who can survive due to her proximity to patriarchal society, due to her masculinized role with her job in law enforcement. Women who are meek and subservient are killed, but women cannot win again. With Holly, she seems assertive, but she's too extreme, so she gets killed. There are plenty of gender contradictions for women in film and beyond. In both films, we see that it is typical heteronuclear family unit that is under attack by people from fractured families. In Lee Edelman's seminal work, No Future Queer Theory, Edelman talks about the idea of reproductive futurism. It is the future that has shaped all our politics to maintain the structure of a capitalist society. The constant supply of people who can work is what is essential. The future cogs in the machine have to reach adulthood for that to happen. We are no more able to conceive of a politics without a fantasy of the future than we are able to conceive of a future without the figure of the child. Queerness is seen as the outside of this, as they are not concerned with reproduction, but with pleasure, embracing the death drive. The death drive, a concept from Lacanian psychoanalysis that is a counter to the life drive, emphasizing queerness as a force that resists normative futurism. The queer comes to figure the bar to every realization of futurity, the resistance internal to the social, to every social structure or form. These films play with the fear that the family is always under attack by those who are not adhering to these structures. The reason of family killing is so horror-inducing is because it is the negation of the future. We mourn the loss of the future that these children could have had, the future in which they have children too to continue the world as it is. Even in the films, we can see that this is a fear that is easy to manipulate out of audiences, as they too have lived in a political atmosphere that has cultivated this fear of the outsider who does not follow the rules and causes chaos. It is known that it is the pressure to endure the strict binary that causes some to act out, in these films violently. Longlegs is queer negativity, which represents that queerness should not be about assimilation into society, but pushing against these norms. Longlegs rejects Christianity and all its ideals embedded in society, and refuses to succumb to it by killing himself in the end. He too is rendered as someone who doesn't conform to his prescribed role of provider, as he stays in another woman's house and lets her daughter provide for them. Prisoners and Longlegs villainizes those who only take children and do not produce them in fully intact family units. Director Oz Perkins clarifies that his look is inspired by old glam rockers from the 70s and 80s who are notoriously known for causing the Satanic panic. Music featured demonic imagery, an image crafted to seem edgy and appeal to the youth of the time who wanted to rebel against the appearance. The devil can be seen as a liberator for those who cannot conform to Christian patriarchy. These rock looks were challenging masculinity and often conflated with queer culture, even though these spaces were still male-dominated. However, it did not stop the conservative media from raising alarm about the harm that this demonic imagery was causing their children. Longlegs is also queer-coded as a coward, as he hides behind women, and is not seen using his own brute strength to dominate and kill. This also adds to the feminization of the character. An old woman can also be coded as evil in tales of the Wicked Witch, the Hag. Witches are accused of copulating with the devil. The witch is defined as an abject figure in that she's represented within the patriarchal discourse as an impeccable enemy of the symbolic. She's thought to be dangerous, wily, capable of drawing on her evil powers to wreak destruction on the community. Holly and Ruth resemble someone like Mrs. Voorhees, mother of Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, who is revealed to be the killer. She, like Holly, is acting out of grief. Her target is not God, but lascivious teen camp counselors. Their negligence led to the death of her son. Minnie Cassavetes, the devil-worshipping next-door neighbor from Rosemary's Baby, are all hags who exploit innocent women and young people. At first glance, we are not meant to suspect them like we do Alex or Bobby Taylor, who are victims of Holly. It plays with our preconceived notions that older women cannot be a threat like antisocial men are, but by revealing that they are killers, acting out of an overpouring of misplaced maternal love, it feeds another trope of the bad mother. The bad mother or witch, the underside of the first myth, sadistic, hurtful, and jealous, she refuses the self-abnegating role, demanding her own life. Because of her evil behavior, this mother often takes control of the narrative, but she is punished for her violation of the narrative, of the desired patriarchal ideal, the good mother. The good mother who is all nurturing and self-abnegating, the angel of the house. Totally invested in husband and children, she lives only through them and is marginal to the narrative. The death of Holly and Ruth is the death of the bad mother, as she attacks children out of an outpouring of maternal love that has been twisted. These types of mothers die. Holly is a mother to her dead son, but also Alex, who she kidnapped and forced to live with her. At first glance, Holly looks selfless like a good mother, as she seems to be caring for her nephew, Alex, who has no one else. Ruth seems like a good mother till she places the demonic power over her own daughter by attacking her when she interferes. In Longlegs, the father, who's most susceptible to the subliminals, initiates the killings, while in Prisoners, it is also the father who is shown as violent. They believe it is for the greater good, like Holly, who commits violence for the devil. In Prisoners, it is commenting on how trauma can shape the psyche, and seemingly good and virtuous people can also be corrupted if they have suffered enough pain and don't focus on letting go. In Longlegs, it is the women who let the evil into the home. Women are the perpetual Eve. They are the ones who blindly trust authority, yet are told not to disobey Christ, the ultimate authority. Longlegs has all the aesthetic presentation of a horror film, but the suspense and tension leads to nowhere, while every meticulous clue is all tied together into a perfect, spine-chilling conclusion in Prisoners. The ambiguity of Longlegs is also unearned, unlike Prisoners, which takes time to leave us intertwined clues that give us a more satisfying ending and a more interesting twist than Longlegs. The living survivor Ruby in Longlegs will also be changed like Lee if the doll is not destroyed. Alex is returned to his family. It is briefly shown through the newspaper, suggesting that we don't have to think too much about it. He is with his family. Everything will be okay now. Hope that he does not meet the same fate as Bobby Taylor. The ambiguous ending, where there is no absolution of evil, is reminiscent of the ending in Prisoners. Like Longlegs and Ruth, the threat Holly is dead. Keller, who tries to save his children himself, gets injured by Holly, who coerced him into taking a potent drug cocktail, then shoots and traps him underground. She seals his fate by driving a car over the secret entrance. With an open wound and only a whistle, Keller tries to survive, but even though Loki might hear him, the ground is frozen and there's no guarantee that he will survive. Maybe the lack of God in both films suggests that evil exists and God does not. It could be a way of saying that God was created for the purpose of explaining evil, but it cannot, as it is absent from life. Evil exists in reality, but God is seen as removed from it. That's why in the films, evil seems to win. Keller strays from his righteous path. Holly and Ruth too. Lee, being the only survivor, is the one who does not believe in anything. Lee being tethered to Longlegs could be attributed to the director, Oz Perkins' personal association with the film. He says that this film, like all his films, is personal to a degree. This film is about his parents, his father, actor Anthony Perkins, and mother, Barry Berenson. In an interview with IndieWire, director Oz Perkins states that the film Longlegs takes a more personal turn. All the films I generate are essentially based on my experience, and that tends to be my experience with my parents. My mother can create a cover story, but a mother can submerge a truth in what she feels is the service of the family, and how that creates what it creates. In the case of my family, I was dealing with public figure parents. My father was a gay man who was closeted, and in the world that we live in, it wasn't acceptable. And it still isn't, as insane as it is. My mother made this decision that was going to be true for our family. Everybody knew it. Even my brother and I theoretically knew it, but we were never given any language for it, he said. The idea that his mother could keep up the story throughout his whole childhood partly inspired his film Longlegs, in which Alicia Witt's character keeps a shocking secret from her daughter. Your mother can protect you from a truth that she thinks is unsavory, reflected Osgood, and then you just build a crazy movie around it. If we simply look at the film as a family allegory, Ruth is his mother, Longlegs the father, and Lee is him, the child. If we were to look with this context, we can infer that Perkins sees Longlegs as his closeted famous father, who is presented as a leggy, long-haired blonde wearing a full face of makeup, obsessed with dolls, and living sequestered in a basement, cavorting with the devil to destroy perfect, heteronormative Christian families. This recalls the statement, the narcissism associated with homosexual desire, that Edelman states in his book, They Are Living a Life That Disregards the Family in Service of Their Own Pursuit of Pleasure. While the family is also a narcissistic structure that makes people only care about themselves and less about the greater community, and further alienates people into a hierarchical structure that stimulates that of greater society. Like Keller, who insists that it's only you that can save yourself and people turn on each other during times of crisis. Is the danger coming from inside the house, like in Longlegs, where it is the family who causes you the most harm and trauma, and preventing people from the freedom to live authentically? Longlegs himself is an agent of chaos, a loyal follower of Satan who stands as an antithesis of all things good. With the work of Longlegs being so closely intertwined with his family history and Longlegs' close proximity to queerness, it can seem like the film is equating queerness with evil, even though that's an obvious attempt to distance Longlegs from the paternal homosexual association with the posters of pornography on the basement walls. The queer association is very much included within the film. Just like Psycho that has skeletons, a dirty secret in the basement, a lot of Anthony Perkins' career has been about hiding his sexuality. The Trial and Psycho notably. Trauma and deviance have been a staple theme that has been revisited throughout his career. While Psycho, Perkins' most defining work, which he directed a later installment of himself, sought to add some understanding of the character of Bates by giving him nuance and allowing the viewer to witness how his madness was forged out of abuse. Longlegs the film does not offer such a reason to keep the horror alive, or for a potential sequel. Films from Psycho onward often present the monster as originating within the family, a dysfunctional and traumatic product of internal tension. Lee being awkward because of the demonic presence in her seems like a family connection, like Harry Potter and Voldemort. In almost a paternal way, it is passed down. If Ruth is a representation of his mother, her love leaves her passive and ultimately siding with the devil, thus taking part in the destruction of heterosexual families. When Ruth yells, "Don't call me that," when Lee says, "Mom, please," it can be read as her attempt to relinquish the maternal role as she only identifies with Longlegs. This can be read as Perkins questioning his mother's loyalty, placing her husband's needs over that of her children. With Ruth saying that they will be damned, is Berenson's way of saying that their father's transgressive lifestyles were to be revealed, them as a family unit will be harmed. The mother, to keep up with the charade of the family, was willing to do anything. Lee suppresses most of her memories about Longlegs that only resurface later when she's ready to confront them. The film takes place so close to the real Perkins' death that it can be a way to interpret that only after the passing can the family be free from the hidden truths and move on from the pain of living a false life. Perkins is not homophobic and probably does not hate his parents, but there is a lack of awareness as to how there could be a tendency to let biases and personal experiences cloud our better judgment and make stereotypes of villains. Artists are not responsible how their art is interpreted, but as filmmakers, awareness of how the genre functions in relation to society can be a bonus to making the film more relatable to the present instead of being a pastiche not just in aesthetic but in values. A more 2020s lens would have been better. The film would have definitely worked better in the era that Prisoners was released, but today it may be more progressive and of the times if Longlegs was not so queer-coded. In the years that have followed, not much strides have been taken to dismantling harmful stereotypes of mental illness and its overrepresentation of violence in media that we see in Longlegs. It is hard to view Longlegs as more than just a demonic remix of Prisoners, reusing a lot of the themes, characters, and settings of Prisoners, but I would say for the worse. Watching one can evoke the feelings of the other. It's okay to be inspired by our contemporaries, but it can be jarring when the elements are so similar and it's so close in time. Living as a family comes with its own contradictions and shackles. Alternatives are few and far between. At least horror remains a site for the exploration of our transgressive nature. Prisoners exists in a world where there is nothing above or below. It is humans alone that cause destruction. But in Longlegs, yes, everything is metaphorical, but it wants us to believe that evil is more powerful and there is nothing we can do about it. This view stagnates the film and makes it less interesting thematically as compared to Prisoners. In a sea of remakes and franchise films, I appreciate that Longlegs exists as a somewhat original work from someone with an appreciation for horror as more than just cheap thrills, but for a site of introspection.